The Passion of the Christ was released in 2004. Mel Gibson directed it. Jim Caviezel starred in it. And it depicts the final 12 hours of Jesus leading up to his crucifixion. And I wanted to give it a revisit because it's been 20 years since the film released. And I remember growing up in church and just kind of around my family and just Christian circles in general, this film getting a ton of praise. I remember people being extremely emotionally affected and crying, tears in the theater and tears at home when they revisit the film, and it just leaving a huge emotional impact. And so my wife and I got to revisit it this week and see if it held up, and see if it was as timeless as I at least would have liked to remember. I think this film does a lot of things really well. I think Jim Caviezel's performance is, a career-defining performance. I think something that Jim uniquely depicts is just the stress and the toll that it would have taken just on the human body throughout this entire experience. Like, you open up, the film opens up with him sweating blood, of course, as Jesus did, but the way that he's shaken, the way that he fears, it is truly felt by the audience member. Just his performance all the way through, the weakness that is shown as he's carrying the cross later in the third act of the film, and even the flip side of that, some of the character buildings, the story is told through a series of flashbacks, and so you get to see Jesus and just who he was before. And I think that Jim Caviezel actually could have been maybe the only American that can kind of step into this role and embody what would have been, a Middle Eastern, middle-aged man. Something that's also pretty great about this film is they don't really hold back from the brutality of crucifixion and how gruesome the process was, and they really try to tell just an accurate visual showing, or they try to show an accurate visual of what it would have looked like to be beaten and to be chastised and to have to bear that cross and to walk up the hill and to be nailed to it. Mel Gibson, the whole team, they don't hold back from showing these gruesome, very hard to watch moments. I mean, throughout the film, there were at least 3-4 times where my teeth are clenched and my toes are curled because it's just so hard to watch. I think that this gives a fresh perspective from what the audience is used to seeing when it comes to Jesus. Maybe they've seen him on the cross, but no way there's been that much blood. Maybe they've seen Jesus beaten, but no way do they have the whips on him tearing his flesh apart. And it really puts into perspective what it could have been like to at least be there witnessing this gruesome process. And Jenna even mentioned it through halfway through the film that this, when we think of Jesus going to the cross, it's kind of like, okay, now it's time for Jesus to go to the cross, or he just did that, and we read about it and kind of pass over it. But this is a striking visual to witness and to experience, and it really brings that historical event to life. So I think that's walking away. That's probably the most impactful part, is that, when you talk about death of Jesus, crucifixion of Jesus, if you read it, if you're reading through the stories, you don't necessarily put this much of a gruesome visual to it. And that is what the film does best. The two best scenes are, or the two most memorable scenes, are the torture scene and the nailing to the cross and Jesus's final moments in the last 10 minutes of the film. It's a tragic crescendo where the film is well paced, but it just builds up and builds up and builds up all the way to his death and then his resurrection, which is only a couple of minutes right before the credits roll. But basically, these scenes leave an impact on you, and it's because they don't hold back. It's not this let's look away and pass over or glaze over this part. No, they show the whips on his back. They show the claws of the whips tearing off his flesh, and essentially it's hard to watch, and it's something that you don't forget. And for that, it's not really a rewatchable film, but it definitely hits the mark, and it works. So that's the best part of this film by far. I don't think that it's like a masterpiece by any means. I don't think that this is timeless. There are some things that I think didn't work for me. One of them being just creative choices that they chose to make with some of the cinematography. I mean, the first thing that I think bothers me, and this is probably me coming off of Dune Part 2, released earlier this year, where there's this messianic figure in the form of Paul, and Denis Villeneuve shoots it in a way where there's so many grand moments, these big set pieces and these masterfully done wide shots. There's plenty of shots that show Paul leading a massive crowd of people. There's plenty of shots that show the scape and build the world. And that's something that this film definitely lacks. You could tell that the budget was probably more restricted, and they're left with lots of medium shots, lots of close-ups on the actors, really relying on their performance, which is great, and I think it works. But you're telling the story of Jesus's crucifixion. You're telling a calendar-defining story, you know? And for me, I just would like for there to be a sense of grand involved in that. And it feels a little bit like this is a story that's just happening within the context of this smaller city, rather than this is a story that's like going to affect the entire world. This crucifixion has the stakes that will change the world, you know, and carry a religion for thousands of years. So that's something that I think is missing. I think that cinematically, like, they did a ton of slow motion. My eye is just so naturally inclined and drawn to real time, and the slow motion works, I think, for the most part, but there are some times where you're just like, the pacing is so slow here. And you just feel that. You feel that a little bit in the film. There's also some creative things that they did where frames were missing in some of the slow-mo shots, and I get that's all a creative choice, but I don't think it necessarily feeds the story and progresses the story. And I also don't feel like that it's timeless. You know, you watch it back and you very much feel like, oh, this is like kind of early 2000s style film, which ends up being a weak point when the credits roll. And also, if we're going to talk about stylized choices and creative choices, we got to talk about Satan. You know, Satan is in this film, and some people are going to like that. Some people are not going to like that. But I think it worked. It works for me. He creates such a dark presence that is just kind of looming over Jesus as he's going through this time, and also looms over Judas as he's struggling through the recent betrayal that had just happened. And I think it works. I think there are 3 specific completely cheeseball moments for me that kind of take me out of it as a whole. When it's introducing Satan, it's trying to make the viewer feel disgusted by him. And so in doing this, they have like this little close-up of his face, and a CGI like worm goes into his nose. And I'm like, Satan is Satan without that CGI worm. Like, you don't have to have that to show that he's gross and evil and disgusting. And then also later on in the film, he's looking at Jesus, he's staring at him down, and he's holding like a mini Satan and kind of caressing like this baby Satan, mutant Satan, whatever you want to call it, like turns around and like smiles at Jesus. And I'm like, this is just so corny. Like, why this is such an emotionally impactful and heavy scene, and I don't think that Satan's little minion being there adds any value. If you cut it out, it's actually like, okay, more of the focus is on Jim's performance, and a lot of the weight is on Satan and kind of his creepy presence, rather than kind of like this weird like minion visual. The third thing that took me out of this film is really, there's this part where Judas is essentially, he's kind of run away. He's hiding under a bridge after he has betrayed Jesus, and you feel the darkness that's looming over his shoulders, that the enemy is just coming for him. And he like turns off and he looks into this like CGI mist, and it turns into a demon, and there's a jump scare. And I'm like, why? Like it makes you think like, what movie am I watching right now? And I get it. Like you're trying to inflict the fear into the audience and kind of the darkness that's looming over Judas into the audience, but it's just simply a weird creative choice in my opinion. And then I think like Judas's subplot in and of itself to watch his downfall, that the betrayal ultimately led to his very graphic demise, and just creates more weight. And overall, you know, looking back, this film does not categorize as rewatchable, like in the slightest. It is one that you want to watch maybe every 10 years if you're feeling up for it and if you've got a strong stomach, you know, because there is lots of graphic imagery here. And I think it could be healthy to revisit around like a Good Friday scenario to get your kind of mind right going into like an Easter Sunday. But ultimately, it's not one that you're just going to throw on for a casual watch. It's not an encouraging film, nothing like that. But it does communicate the message and it hits the mark, but not without its flaws. You know, 20 years later, it's got some of the dated nature that's going to come with a 20-year-old film. But for me, I give it a 3.5 out of 10 and would not rank it as rewatchable, but it was a great watch, especially to show my wife for the first time. I think the next time I am going to visit this film might be when my son is maybe a teenager or something, and it's like, let's sit down and let's like analyze the story and visit it this way. But that's kind of my review for Passion of the Christ. I hope to do more of these soon. Thanks for watching. Let me know your thoughts on the Passion of the Christ and let me know the last time you saw it. I hope this inspires you to go and watch some films that you maybe haven't seen in a long time and get a fresh new take as you have grown and as you're an adult. And I know that it's done that for me, so looking forward to making more of these. Peace.